The morning fog hung low over the streets of London like a grey blanket. The city was waking slowly, but it did not feel peaceful. Sirens had screamed during the night, and many buildings still smelled of smoke and dust from recent air raids. Windows were covered with wooden boards, and sandbags stood like silent guards outside important offices. People walked quickly, their faces serious, their eyes tired. War had become part of daily life. On the platform of King's Cross Station stood a young man named Ethan Miller. He was 22 years old, tall and slim, wearing a freshly pressed military uniform that still felt strange on his body. The heavy boots on his feet made him feel older than his years. A small brown suitcase rested beside him, filled with only the most necessary items: a spare shirt, a notebook, a photograph of his family, and a folded letter that he had already read many times. The letter was from his mother. Ethan carefully unfolded the paper again, even though he knew every word by heart. Her handwriting was neat but slightly shaky, showing both love and worry. "My dear Ethan," it read, "I know you are strong, but remember that strength is not only in your arms. It is also in your heart. Be kind when you can, brave when you must, and never forget where you come from. Your father and I are praying for your safe return. No matter how far you go, you are always with us." Ethan swallowed hard. He folded the letter and placed it inside his jacket pocket, close to his chest, as if it could protect him from what lay ahead. The loud whistle of the train echoed across the platform. Soldiers hugged their families tightly. Some mothers cried openly. Some fathers tried to smile but failed. Children waved small flags, not fully understanding the danger their loved ones were walking into. Ethan stood alone. His parents had said goodbye the night before because travel was dangerous during daylight bombings. He could still remember his mother's tight hug and his father's firm handshake. His father had been a soldier during the previous war and had warned him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. As Ethan boarded the train, the metal steps felt cold under his hands. Inside, the carriage was crowded with young men just like him, faces full of uncertainty, excitement, and quiet terror. Some joked loudly to hide their fear. Others stared silently out the window. The train began to move, slowly at first, then faster. London slipped away behind them. The tall buildings faded into open fields and small villages. Ethan watched green trees pass by, thinking about how peaceful the countryside looked compared to the burning city. He wondered how long this peace would last. Across from him sat a soldier named Thomas Reed, a cheerful man with messy brown hair and a crooked smile. "First mission?" Thomas asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes. You?" "Second," Thomas replied. "You never really get used to it, but you learn to breathe through the fear." Ethan forced a small smile. He wasn't sure if that made him feel better or worse. After several hours, the train reached the southern coast. From there, the soldiers were moved onto a large transport ship that would carry them across the English Channel to France. The sea air was sharp and salty. Gray clouds covered the sky like thick blankets. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Ethan leaned against the railing and watched the land disappear into the mist. He felt as though he was leaving behind not just his home, but his old life as well. Ahead of him waited a world filled with danger, noise, and uncertainty. Night fell quickly. The ship sailed quietly, its lights dimmed to avoid enemy detection. The cold wind cut through Ethan's coat. He pulled it tighter around himself and stared at the dark water below. The waves moved endlessly, as if the ocean itself did not care about human wars. Suddenly, distant flashes of light appeared on the horizon. A few seconds later, deep thunder-like sounds rolled across the sky. Anti-aircraft guns were firing somewhere far away. The crew grew tense. Orders were whispered. Everyone moved carefully. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was the closest he had ever been to real combat. He imagined enemy planes above the clouds, searching for ships like theirs. He imagined bombs falling into the cold water. Fear wrapped around his thoughts, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan pulled out his notebook and began to write a letter to his family. His hands shook slightly as the ship rocked beneath him. "Dear Mom and Dad," he wrote, "I am on my way now. The sea is dark and cold, but I keep your words close to my heart. I promise to stay strong and to look after the men beside me. Whatever happens, know that your love travels with me." He paused for a moment, listening to the hum of the ship's engine. Around him, other soldiers slept or whispered quietly. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," he continued, "but I will face it with courage. Please take care of each other. I hope to come home soon and sit with you again at our kitchen table." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his bag. It gave him comfort to imagine his parents reading his words one day. As dawn approached, the ship neared the French coast. The sky slowly turned from black to dark blue, then gray. The outlines of land appeared through the mist. Ethan stood on deck, gripping the railing tightly. His stomach twisted with nervous energy. The distant sound of artillery echoed across the shoreline. Smoke rose faintly in the distance. This was no peaceful arrival. This was a land scarred by conflict. Officers shouted commands. Soldiers checked their equipment. Helmets were tightened, weapons secured, and packs adjusted. Everyone prepared silently, each man trapped in his own thoughts. Ethan took one last deep breath of the salty air. He touched the pocket where his mother's letter rested and whispered softly, "I will come back." The ship slowed as it approached the harbor. Boats waited to transport the soldiers onto land. The moment had arrived. The first step into a war that would change him forever. Cold morning air filled Ethan's lungs as his boots touched French soil for the first time. The harbor was crowded with soldiers, supply trucks, and heavy crates of equipment. The smell of oil mixed with the salty sea breeze. Distant explosions echoed like rolling thunder, reminding everyone that the battlefield was never far away. Ethan adjusted the straps on his backpack and followed his unit inland. The road was narrow and muddy, lined with broken fences and abandoned carts. Fields that once grew wheat were now torn apart by shell craters. Crows circled above, their sharp cries cutting through the quiet. After several hours of marching, the unit reached a small village that had clearly suffered heavy bombing. Roofs had collapsed, walls were blackened by fire, and glass crunched under their boots. A church bell lay broken in the street, half buried in rubble. Doors swung open in the wind, creaking like ghosts whispering secrets. "Stay alert," the captain ordered. "Search for survivors and hidden threats." Ethan moved carefully between shattered buildings with Thomas and two other soldiers. Every shadow looked suspicious. A sudden noise could mean danger, or someone needing help. They entered what used to be a bakery. Burnt wooden shelves leaned against the walls, and the sweet smell of bread had been replaced by dust and smoke. Ethan noticed a small shoe near the counter. His chest tightened. It was a painful reminder that families once lived and laughed here. As they stepped into the back room, Ethan heard a faint sound. A soft cry. He froze and raised his hand to signal silence. Everyone listened closely. The cry came again, weak and trembling. "It's coming from over there," Ethan whispered. They followed the sound to a collapsed wall where broken bricks and wooden beams were piled high. Ethan dropped his rifle gently and began moving debris with his hands. Dust filled the air, making him cough. Beneath the rubble, he saw a small face streaked with dough and tears. A young girl, no older than 8 or 9 years old, stared back at him with wide, frightened eyes. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, though his French was poor. "You're safe now." The girl didn't fully understand his words, but his gentle voice calmed her slightly. Her leg was trapped under a heavy plank. Carefully, Thomas helped lift the wood while Ethan pulled the girl free. She cried out in pain, but did not resist. Ethan wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and lifted her into his arms. She was light, thin from hunger and fear. Her hands clung tightly to his shirt, as if he were the only solid thing left in her world. "Her name?" Thomas asked gently, trying to smile. The girl whispered, "Claire." Suddenly, a sharp roar filled the sky. "Enemy planes! Air raid!" someone shouted. The soldiers rushed for cover. Ethan ran into a nearby cellar with Claire still in his arms. Dust rained from the ceiling as explosions shook the ground above them. The walls trembled violently. The sound was deafening. Claire buried her face in Ethan's chest, shaking with terror. He held her tightly, covering her head with his hand. "It's okay," he repeated, even though his own heart felt like it might burst. "It will pass." Seconds felt like hours. Each explosion sent fear through his bones. He could hear stones falling, glass breaking, and distant screams of metal tearing apart. In that dark cellar, surrounded by fear and dust, Ethan realized something deeply important. This war was not just about borders, flags, or power. It was about protecting people like Claire, innocent lives trapped between forces they could not control. Finally, the bombing stopped. Silence slowly returned, broken only by distant crackling fires and collapsing debris. The soldiers carefully climbed back into the open air. Smoke drifted through the village like a gray fog. Flames licked at the remains of wooden houses. The sky was empty again, but the damage was heavy. A medical truck arrived soon after. Medics quickly examined Claire's injured leg and placed her on a stretcher. She looked frightened again as they prepared to take her away. Ethan knelt beside her. "You're going to be okay," he said gently, pointing toward the medics. "They will help you." Claire reached out and grabbed his hand tightly. Her eyes searched his face as if memorizing it. Then, slowly, she smiled, a small, fragile smile filled with gratitude and trust. That smile stayed with Ethan long after the truck disappeared down the road. Later that afternoon, the unit continued searching the village for threats and survivors. They found empty houses, scattered belongings, broken photographs, and abandoned toys. Each object told a silent story of families forced to flee in fear. As the sun began to set, the sky turned orange and red, reflecting off shattered windows. The village looked strangely beautiful in its broken state, like a painting of loss and memory. The soldiers set up a temporary camp near the edge of town. They shared simple rations and water. Everyone was quiet, lost in their thoughts. Thomas finally spoke. "You did a good thing today, Ethan." Ethan nodded slowly. "I just did what anyone should do." Thomas shook his head. Not everyone would risk their life like that. Ethan stared into the small campfire burning between them. He thought of Claire's frightened eyes and thankful smile. He thought of his mother's letter and her words about kindness. That night, as Ethan lay inside his tent listening to the distant rumble of artillery, he realized that the war was already changing him. Fear still lived in his heart, but now something stronger had joined it: purpose. He wasn't fighting only because he was ordered to. He was fighting to protect lives, memories, and futures. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and thick, with tall pine trees. Morning fog clung to the ground like pale smoke, wrapping the soldiers in cold, damp air. Every footstep sank softly into wet soil and fallen leaves. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the distant cry of birds and the quiet click of equipment. Ethan moved carefully behind his unit, his rifle held close to his chest. His breath formed small clouds in the chilly air. This was not a normal patrol. It was a secret mission, dangerous and urgent. An enemy communication tower was hidden deep inside the forest. From there, enemy forces were sending messages to coordinate attacks. If the tower was destroyed, many lives could be saved. If the mission failed, disaster could follow. The team consisted of 6 soldiers, led by a calm but strict sergeant named Harris. Each man knew his role. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. They advanced slowly, watching every shadow. Sunlight filtered through the trees in thin golden lines, creating moving patterns on the forest floor. The beauty of nature felt strange in a place filled with danger. Ethan's mind stayed sharp. Every snap of a twig made his muscles tighten. He remembered Sergeant Harris's warning: the forest hides both friends and enemies. Trust nothing you cannot see clearly. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached a small hill. Through the branches, Ethan could see part of the communication tower rising above the trees like a dark metal skeleton. Thin wires stretched between poles, disappearing into the forest. 2 enemy guards walked slowly around the base of the tower, rifles hanging from their shoulders. Sergeant Harris raised his hand, signaling the team to stop. He studied the area through binoculars, then whispered instructions. 2 soldiers would quietly move to the left to distract the guards. The rest would approach from the right and place explosives near the tower's base. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. This was the most dangerous moment so far. Moving slowly, he followed Sergeant Harris and Thomas through thick bushes. Branches scratched against their uniforms. Insects buzzed near their ears. Sweat ran down Ethan's back despite the cold air. Suddenly, a sharp voice shouted in the distance. The distraction had begun. One of the guards turned toward the noise, lifting his rifle. The second guard followed. Their attention shifted away from the tower. Now, Harris whispered. They rushed forward, staying low. Ethan knelt beside the metal support beam while Thomas handed him a small pack of explosives. His hands trembled slightly as he fixed the device into position, tightening the wires exactly as he had been trained. A sudden crack echoed through the forest. Gunfire. The distraction team had been spotted. Shouts filled the air. More enemy soldiers began running toward the tower. Hurry! Harris ordered. Ethan finished setting the timer and pulled back quickly. The team sprinted toward the trees, bullets snapping past them and hitting branches overhead. One of the soldiers behind Ethan cried out and fell. It was Mark, a quiet young man who often wrote poetry in his notebook at night. Without thinking, Ethan turned back. Ethan, keep moving. Harris shouted. But Ethan could not leave Mark behind. He grabbed Mark under the arms and dragged him toward cover as bullets struck the ground nearby. Mark's leg was bleeding badly, his face pale with pain. Thomas ran back to help. Together, they pulled Mark behind a fallen log. You're going to be okay, Ethan said, pressing cloth against the wound to slow the bleeding. Mark tried to smile weakly. Yes, my poems will have to wait. A loud explosion thundered through the forest. The communication tower collapsed with a scream of tearing metal and sparks. Smoke rose into the air. The mission was successful. But the enemy was still close. Retreat. Harris ordered. The team moved quickly through narrow forest paths, carrying Mark between them. Their lungs burned as they ran. The sounds of shouting and gunfire faded slowly behind them. After a long, exhausting escape, they finally reached a safe zone near a shallow river where friendly forces waited. Medics rushed forward to treat Mark. Ethan sat on a rock, breathing heavily, his uniform covered in mud and sweat. His hands still shook from adrenaline. Sergeant Harris approached him. His face was serious, but his eyes showed respect. You disobeyed orders, Harris said quietly. Ethan lowered his head. I couldn't leave him. Harris paused for a moment, then nodded slowly. Sometimes the right choice doesn't follow the rulebook. You saved his life. Ethan felt relief wash over him. Later that evening, the soldiers rested near the river. The water reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. Birds returned to the trees as if nothing had happened. Thomas sat beside Ethan, tossing small stones into the water. You were brave today. Ethan shook his head. I was scared. Thomas smiled. That's what bravery is. Ethan looked across the quiet river and thought about how close death had come. He thought about Mark's poems, the fallen tower, and the bullets flying through the trees. He realized that war tested not only strength, but the heart and conscience of every soldier. That night, as the stars appeared above the dark forest, Ethan wrote a few lines in his notebook. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to protect life even when fear screams at you to run. He closed the notebook and stared into the sky, knowing that even greater challenges still waited ahead. Winter arrived suddenly and without mercy. The green fields turned into endless white sheets of snow, and icy winds cut through clothing like sharp knives. Trees stood bare, their branches frozen and lifeless. Even breathing felt painful in the bitter cold. Ethan's unit was stationed near a small abandoned farmhouse at the edge of a frozen valley. The building offered little protection from the freezing air. Broken windows were covered with thin wooden boards, and snow drifted inside through every crack. At night, the temperature dropped so low that water froze inside their bottles. The soldiers wore heavy coats and gloves, but it was never enough. Fingers went numb within minutes. Faces burned from the cold. Sleep became difficult because the ground felt like solid ice. Food supplies were running low. Each man received only small portions of bread, soup, and dried meat. Hunger gnawed constantly at their stomachs. Some soldiers lost weight quickly. Others became sick from exhaustion and cold. Despite the harsh conditions, the unit remained alert. Enemy forces were believed to be nearby, moving quietly through the frozen hills. Any mistake could lead to disaster. One evening, thick gray clouds covered the sky, blocking the moonlight completely. The valley became dark and silent. Only the sound of wind moving across the snow could be heard. Ethan sat near a small stove inside the farmhouse, warming his hands. Thomas was beside him, rubbing his arms to stay warm. Do you remember summer? Thomas asked quietly. Green grass, warm air, No frozen boots. Ethan smiled faintly. Feels like another lifetime. Suddenly, a distant crunch echoed across the snow. Both men froze. Footsteps. Ethan grabbed his rifle slowly and signaled to Thomas. They listened carefully. The sound came again, closer this time. Alarm spread through the camp. Soldiers quietly moved into defensive positions, hiding behind broken walls and snow-covered fences. Then it happened. Gunfire exploded into the silence. Bullets ripped through the wooden boards. Splinters flew into the air. Shouts filled the darkness. The enemy had launched a surprise attack under the cover of night. Ethan dropped to the ground and returned fire, aiming toward moving shadows. Muzzle flashes briefly lit up the battlefield like small bursts of lightning. The cold air made every breath burn inside his lungs. The fight was chaotic. Snow kicked up with every bullet impact. The enemy tried to move closer, using the darkness as cover. Protect the supply room. Sergeant Harris shouted. The supply room contained their remaining food, medicine, and ammunition. Losing it could mean starvation and defeat. Ethan and 3 other soldiers rushed toward the back of the farmhouse, taking cover behind a low stone wall. The enemy was attempting to break in through a damaged door. Ethan fired carefully, forcing the attackers to retreat slightly. Thomas threw a small smoke grenade to confuse them. The smoke spread quickly, blending with the night fog. The fighting continued for long minutes that felt like hours. Hands were numb. Ears rang from constant gunfire. Muscles burned from tension and cold. Finally, the enemy began to withdraw, disappearing into the frozen darkness. Silence slowly returned, broken only by heavy breathing and the distant echo of retreating footsteps. The soldiers remained alert for several minutes, expecting another wave. But none came. They had survived. A quick count showed that 2 soldiers were lightly injured but safe. The supplies remained intact. Relief washed through the group like warm water. Inside the farmhouse, the men gathered around the small stove again. Faces were pale, eyes tired, but spirits were stronger. Ethan noticed a young soldier named Lucas shivering badly. His lips were slightly blue from cold and shock. Without hesitation, Ethan removed his spare scarf and wrapped it around Lucas's neck. "Here," Ethan said. "This will help." Lucas looked surprised. "But you'll be colder." Ethan shrugged lightly. "We'll survive together." Thomas smiled at the gesture. Later that night, the soldiers shared what little food they had. A small piece of bread was divided into thin slices so everyone could have something. No one complained. Hunger felt easier when shared. They talked quietly about home, warm kitchens, family dinners, laughter, and normal life. These memories gave them strength to face the cold night ahead. Ethan lay on his bedroll, staring at the cracked ceiling. His body ached, but his mind remained awake. He thought about how close they had come to losing everything. He thought about the fragile line between life and death in war. He also thought about kindness. A scarf, a piece of bread, a few warm words in the darkness. Small acts, yet powerful enough to keep hope alive. The wind howled outside as snow continued to fall, covering the battlefield in silent white. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight they had survived together. Ethan closed his eyes slowly, knowing that winter had tested not only their bodies, but their humanity. Spring arrived quietly, almost shyly, after the long and brutal winter. Snow slowly melted into clear streams of water that ran beside broken roads and ruined villages. Tiny green plants pushed through the cold soil, reminding everyone that life always finds a way to return. The air felt lighter, warmer, and full of promise. For Ethan and his unit, the change of season brought renewed energy, but also new responsibility. The enemy was retreating, yet danger still remained. Mines were hidden in fields, small groups of soldiers still fought in scattered areas, and damaged towns needed protection. Victory was close, but not yet complete. The unit was sent to assist in clearing a nearby town that had been abandoned during the fighting. Houses stood empty, windows broken, walls cracked by shells. Streets were quiet except for the sound of birds returning to their nests. As Ethan walked through the town, memories of the ruined village where he had found Claire returned to his mind. He wondered if she was safe, if she had healed properly, and if she still remembered the soldier who had carried her from the rubble. Inside one damaged house, Ethan found a small wooden table still standing. On it lay a dusty photograph of a family smiling proudly in front of their home before the war. He gently placed the photo back where it belonged. Even in destruction, respect mattered. Days later, news spread quickly through the camps. The war was ending. At first, no one spoke. The words felt unreal, like a dream too good to trust. Then smiles appeared. Laughter followed. Some soldiers cried openly, releasing years of fear, exhaustion, and loss. Ethan stood quietly, feeling a strange mix of joy and sadness. He was grateful to be alive, but his heart carried memories of those who would never return home. Victory came with both light and shadow. That evening, the camp gathered for a simple celebration. There was no grand feast, only shared food, warm tea, and grateful conversation. Someone played a soft tune on a harmonica. The melody floated gently through the air, peaceful and calm. Thomas sat beside Ethan, smiling warmly. "We made it," he said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes, we did." A few weeks later, Ethan boarded a train back to England. The journey felt completely different from the one he had taken years earlier. This time, the fear was gone. In its place lived quiet reflection and deep gratitude. The countryside passed by again through the train window. Green fields, peaceful villages, children playing near fences. Life was rebuilding itself. When the train finally arrived in London, Ethan stepped onto the platform with steady hands and a full heart. The city still carried scars of war, but new buildings were rising, shops were reopening, and laughter filled the streets again. His parents waited near the gate. His mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms tightly around him. His father stood close, placing a proud hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're home," his mother whispered. "Yes," Ethan replied gently. "I'm home." Days turned into weeks as Ethan slowly adjusted to civilian life. He helped rebuild damaged homes, volunteered to support injured veterans, and spent long evenings talking with his family. Peace felt strange at first, but comforting. One afternoon, a letter arrived with a foreign stamp. Ethan opened it carefully. It was from France. "Dear Ethan," the letter began. "You may not remember me clearly, but my name is Claire. You saved me when my village was destroyed. My leg has healed, and I am now living with my aunt. I go to school again and want to become a nurse one day to help people like you helped me. Thank you for giving me hope when everything was dark." Ethan read the letter twice, his eyes filling with emotion. A warm smile slowly spread across his face. In that moment, he understood something powerful. War had taken many things, but it had also revealed the strength of kindness, courage, and humanity. Ethan placed the letter carefully beside his mother's old one. 2 letters, 2 promises, one life changed forever. He looked out the window at the peaceful sky and whispered quietly, "We made it."